They rolled their eyes when he boarded. They whispered when he sat down. But when they found out who he really was, the entire crew froze in silence. It began like any other morning flight. Crowded terminal, tired travelers, and a line that snaked all the way past Gate 12. The air smelled like burnt coffee and impatience. Flight attendants scanned boarding passes with the kind of forced smiles that said they'd rather be anywhere else. And then he walked in, David Carter, early 40s, calm, collected, the kind of man who carried peace in his posture, plain gray hoodie, faded jeans, a duffel bag slung casually over his shoulder. To most people, he looked like a man heading home after a long work trip. No fancy watch, no designer shoes, no entourage. But what no one realized, not the crew, not the passengers, not even the pilot who nodded absent-mindedly as he passed, was that this quiet man owned the very airline they were flying on. He didn't come to be seen. He came to observe. And as he stepped onto that plane, row by row, past first class and down to the back of economy, you could see the shift. A flight attendant's smile faded when she saw his boarding pass. "Economy, row 28, she muttered under her breath. Another rolled her eyes when he paused to help an older woman lift her bag. "Sir, you're blocking the aisle," she snapped, irritation dripping from every syllable. He nodded, apologetic, but inside he was taking notes. Because this wasn't just another flight. This was an undercover inspection, one that would soon expose just how cruel people can be, and how quickly the tables can turn when respect meets power. It was a humid Tuesday morning when David Carter approached Gate 22 for Flight 217 to Chicago. The flight was full, business travelers tapping away on laptops, families juggling strollers, college kids with headphones lost in their own worlds. David carried nothing but a small duffel and a calm smile. He had no bodyguards, no assistants, no priority tag. Just a regular man boarding a regular flight, or so everyone thought. He handed his boarding pass to the gate agent. "Economy, seat 28B, she said, scanning him quickly from head to toe. Hoodie, jeans, old sneakers, and then plastered on that polite but distant smile used for passengers who don't look important. "Enjoy your flight," she said flatly. David nodded. "Thank you." He wasn't flying economy because he had to. He was doing it because he wanted to see the truth. The truth about how his airline's employees treated people when they didn't know someone was watching. He stepped down the jet bridge. The sound of luggage wheels rattling against metal echoed ahead. Inside the cabin, the air was heavy, recycled, impatient, filled with that mix of perfume and stress that only airports could brew. The lead flight attendant, a tall woman with a tight bun and tighter attitude, stood near the entrance greeting passengers. But her expression changed the moment she saw him. Her smile faltered. "Sir, please move faster," she snapped as he paused to let an elderly woman shuffle past. David blinked, slightly taken aback. He'd only paused for 3 seconds, out of courtesy. Before he could reply, another attendant whispered loud enough for him to hear. "These people always slow down boarding. These people." 2 words that carried an entire history of judgment. David said nothing. He simply stepped aside, letting the line flow again. His voice was calm, his movements gentle. But inside, he was quietly observing the tone, the energy, the treatment. He made his way down the narrow aisle. Every few rows, someone sighed loudly as he stopped to help an older woman adjust her bag, then carefully lifted a mother's diaper bag into the overhead compartment. One attendant rolled her eyes. "Sir, that's not your job. Please sit down and stop holding up the line." The words hung in the air like a slap. Passengers turned to look. A few frowned in sympathy. Others just looked away, pretending not to see. David nodded, his face composed. "No problem," he said softly, settling into seat 28B, middle seat, cramped between 2 strangers. He glanced out the window as the ground crew loaded luggage. From anyone else's view, he was just another tired man in coach, keeping to himself. But beneath that calm exterior, his mind was sharp, focused, and quietly taking notes on everything. Because this wasn't just a flight. It was a test of character, a test of respect. And before the day was over, Every person on that plane would find out exactly who they were really talking to. The plane leveled off above the clouds, a silver bird slicing through the endless blue. The seatbelt light blinked off, and the familiar clatter of the beverage cart echoed down the aisle. That small reminder that comfort, even on a flight, often depended on who you were or who they thought you were. David sat quietly, hands folded, waiting his turn. When the attendant stopped beside his row, he smiled politely. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Could I have a cup of water, please?" The woman didn't even look up from her cart. She sighed, loudly enough for half the row to hear. "We'll get to you when we can, sir," she said sharply. "We have first class to serve first." Her tone wasn't professional. It was dismissive, almost contemptuous, as if kindness was something only reserved for premium seats. David nodded. "Of course," he said. "Take your time." But she never came back. He watched as she poured juice and soda for others. The passenger across the aisle received a full can of ginger ale with a smile. A man 2 rows ahead got an extra napkin and a cheerful, "Enjoy your flight." David? Nothing. The silence around him grew heavier with every minute. Not because he needed the water, but because he was realizing this wasn't personal. It was a pattern. He'd seen it before in airports, restaurants, boardrooms. That quiet bias, that instant judgment. People saw the hoodie, the jeans, the calm black man sitting in coach, and they decided exactly who he was before he opened his mouth. He stayed quiet, observing, memorizing every detail. Then, without warning, the plane jolted violently. A pocket of turbulence rocked the cabin. Drinks spilled. Passengers gasped. The seatbelt light flashed on with a loud ding. David reached for his belt, calmly pulling across his lap. But before he could click it, a sharp voice cut through the noise. "Sir." The same attendant glared down the aisle. "I said seatbelt on. What is so hard about that?" Heads turned. Someone in row 27 laughed under their breath. David froze, not because of fear, but because of the humiliation. The way she said it, loud, scolding, in front of everyone, as if he were a child misbehaving on a school bus. He wanted to speak up, to remind her that tone matters. That respect isn't something you measure in ticket price or seat number. But he didn't. He took a slow breath, fastened the belt, and gave a single nod. "Yes, ma'am." Her eyes narrowed, as if she'd expected defiance. But when none came, she simply turned away. The cabin went quiet again, except for the low hum of engines. David leaned back, looking out at the endless sea of clouds. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He was disappointed. Deeply, because this quiet mistreatment was happening right under his company's name, his brand, his responsibility. He pulled out his tablet, fingers gliding across the screen. The soft glow of the display illuminated his calm face. He opened a folder titled Scirich Airlines Leadership Conference. On the first page was a presentation draft. His assistant had written, "CEO David Carter to address staff on integrity, professionalism, and respect." He stared at those words for a long time. Integrity, professionalism, respect. Then he looked up at the crew walking the aisle, laughing, whispering, oblivious. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. This wasn't just an observation anymore. It was a mission, because when they landed, there would be a meeting. And this time, everyone was going to learn who that man in coach really was. The wheels hit the runway with a hard thud, the plane bouncing once before steadying. A ripple of motion spread to the cabin. Seatbelts unclicked, passengers stretching, phones buzzing back to life. David stayed seated, calm, unhurried, watching. The lead attendant, the same one who had rolled her eyes at him during boarding, leaned into the aisle, her tone dripping with condescension. "Next time, sir," she said with a tight smile, "you might want to dress appropriately for premium boarding zones. It helps avoid confusion." A few passengers nearby chuckled quietly. David simply nodded, a small, polite smile tugging at his lips. "I'll keep that in mind," he said softly. She turned away, smug, unaware that her words would soon echo in her memory for the rest of her career. As the last passengers shuffled out, David stood, grabbed his duffel bag, and waited until the aisle cleared. He was deliberately the last one off. He always was. The jet bridge hummed with the low vibration of engines cooling. The light was softer there, tinted gold by the morning sun streaming through narrow windows. And that's when it happened. Standing just beyond the exit door were two men in black suits, an airport protocol officer, and the airport director himself, holding a tablet and a wide smile. "Mr. Carter." The director greeted warmly, extending a hand. "Welcome back, sir. We prepared your car and security team." The words sliced through the air like thunder. Heads turned. Every crew member froze mid-motion. The attendant's confident smile collapsed instantly. David shook the director's hand calmly. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady. "Always good to be back." Behind him, the co-pilot stepped out and froze too, recognizing the man he just unknowingly served peanuts to as the CEO of Skirich Airlines. The director continued, oblivious to the storm brewing behind them. "The staff didn't realize you were joining us on this inspection flight incognito," he said cheerfully. "I trust everything met your standards, sir." David turned slowly, eyes meeting the crew's. Their faces were pale, expressions flickering between fear, shame, and disbelief. One attendant looked ready to cry. Another tried to hide behind the beverage cart. He studied them for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until even the hum of the engine seemed to fade. Then he spoke, quietly, but every word landed like a gavel. "Actually," he said, his voice calm, "it was enlightening." The attendants exchanged panicked glances. David's tone never rose, but his presence filled the corridor. "I learned a lot today, about attitude, about empathy, and about how easily respect can vanish when uniforms change." The director frowned, realizing something had gone wrong. "Sir, is there—" David raised a hand, still composed. "It's fine," he said, eyes still on the trembling crew. "We'll discuss it at headquarters." And with that, he adjusted his duffel bag, gave the stunned attendants one final nod, and walked down the jet bridge, flanked by security, the airport director trailing respectfully behind. Behind him, whispers filled the plane. Passengers who had seen the whole thing exchanged wide-eyed glances. Someone murmured, "That was the owner?" By the time the crew regrouped, the truth had already spread to the cabin like wildfire. The man they had dismissed, ignored, and humiliated was the man signing their paychecks. And as they stood there, frozen in the middle of the aisle, the taste of guilt heavy in their throats, one thought echoed in every mind: we messed with the wrong man. The next morning, the Skirich headquarters in Chicago buzzed with quiet tension. The corporate floor, usually alive with chatter and ringing phones, was oddly silent. Everyone knew an internal message had gone out overnight. Mandatory meeting. Flight 217 crew, report to the 18th floor, 9 a.m. The same crew who had mocked David the day before now stood outside the executive conference room. Uniforms crisp, faces pale, nerves tight as guitar strings. When the door opened, David Carter was already there. No hoodie this time. Tailored navy suit, clean white shirt, Skirich pin glinting under the lights. He wasn't just another passenger today. He was a man in charge. He motioned for them to sit. No one spoke. The air felt thick enough to choke on. After a long silence, he began, his voice calm, almost gentle. "I started this airline," he said, "because I wanted to build something different. A company that treated people with respect, from passengers to pilots." He leaned forward, eyes steady. "But yesterday I saw something else. I saw arrogance. I saw judgment. I saw employees treating someone like they were less because of how they looked." One attendant blinked back tears. Another fidgeted, gripping her hat like it might save her. David continued, his tone firm now. "You didn't know who I was. And that's fine, you weren't supposed to. But the point of integrity is how you act when you think no one's watching." He paused, letting that hang in the air. "Because someone always is." The lead attendant finally spoke, her voice small. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." David raised a hand. "Stop. This isn't about apologies. It's about awareness." He gestured to a screen on the wall. A still image appeared, a photo from a security cam. David in his hoodie, smiling politely as he helped a woman with her bag. That, he said softly, is what this job is about. Compassion, service, humanity, not checking who's in first class or who looks rich. The room was silent. No one dared move. David stood, gathering his notes. I'm not firing anyone today, he said finally, but I am assigning every one of you to retraining. Started with empathy and diversity workshops. Because if we can't serve people with humility, we don't deserve their business. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. And for the record, he added, glancing over his shoulder, that plainclothes passenger you dismissed yesterday, he's on every flight, in every seat, in every person you meet. Treat them like they matter. He left the room. The sound of his footsteps echoed down the marble hallway, heavy and final. Inside, the crew sat frozen. No one spoke. No one moved. The lesson had landed harder than any reprimand ever could. Outside, through the wide glass windows, a Steerage jet taxied across the runway, gleaming in the sunlight. Its tail number, 217. The same flight, the same plane, but now a symbol of something greater. Because from that day forward, every member of that crew made a silent promise to never judge a passenger by what they wear, to never forget that respect should never depend on status, and to always remember the man who taught them that true leadership doesn't need a first-class seat. They tried to belittle him, mocked the quiet man in the hoodie, the one who didn't look like money or power. To them, he was just another face in economy class. But what they didn't know was that he owned the very sky they flew in. Every sneer, every insult, every eye roll, it all came crashing down the moment they realized who he was. The man they brushed off like nothing was the reason they had wings to fly. And as that plane lifted again into the clouds later that day, something changed. Whispers of "Did you hear?" echoed to the terminals, through crew lounges, through the company's halls. They all knew now. Respect isn't about uniforms or money or the name on a ticket. It's about humanity. It's about grace. It's about remembering that you never know who's sitting beside you or who's quietly taking notes. Because sometimes the person you look down on is the one who built the ground beneath your feet and the sky above your head. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need revenge. His calm was louder than their arrogance. His silence was power. In the end, they tried to humiliate him, but they ended up being educated by the man who owned the wings, the engines, the airline, and the lesson.